Greetings hobbyists and welcome to another Blender Basics video. All of these videos are designed for people relatively new to Blender looking to get a grip on exactly what this powerful program can do. And we'll cover all the elements that you need to know to get started, including things like navigation, manipulating objects, and all those tools that you need to achieve the results you're looking for. We'll do this in a series of short videos so they're all clearly labelled so you can easily search for them. And in each video we'll cover the bare basics while going on to things that are slightly more advanced so that as you continue on your journey through Blender, you can improve the way that you use these different elements. And in this video we're going to be checking out Blender's layout. So we're going to talk through this in a brief amount of detail as normal, and I'll talk about a couple of things in more detail, but most of them we'll save for other videos. I just want to give you an idea of the layout that we're going to be dealing with in Blender, because this can look quite intimidating. There's a lot on the screen all in one go. So we'll start from the top and work our way down, and in the top left hand corner we have this Blender icon, and if you click on this you have some options of things to look at. You very rarely come to this. I can't think that I've been to systems or this install application template once. But the splash screen is useful. That brings up the screen that we have at the beginning, which we can choose our file type, open folders, or go to our recent folders. That's pretty much what I always use it for. Or you've got the donate button, which obviously Blender is a free piece of software, and if you ever want to donate to the Blender Foundation, that's where you go, or their website. The other option you've got is About Blender. Again, this has got the donate option there, as well as some links to other websites, but importantly this is going to tell you what version of Blender you are currently working on. Now this isn't really needed because you can also find it in the bottom right hand corner, but you can look here if you need it. To the right of that we've got our standard program options or drop down menus. File will open, save things and import and export. Importantly, it also has some defaults, so you can save your startup file. That means anything that you put on this display or change in your settings, it will automatically come in like that in Blender, which is really useful. I've got a video that covers that as part of it. I'll link that in the description if you want to have a look at it, and we can also load our factory settings if we need to. Edit is probably going to be the one that you'll come to a little bit more often. You'll use shortcuts for undo and things like that in most instances, but the preferences menu is really important. Again, we mentioned this once in the last video where we were having a look at navigation, but importantly this is where you put in your add-ons and control them, or actually find those add-ons, which we now call extensions if they're there, and again we'll do another video on that, but this is where you'll control those. The other thing that we'll do, which is really important, is you can change your key maps here, specifically either by name or key binding, and that will give you lots of options for changing your shortcuts around. I wouldn't recommend you changing shortcuts in Blender most of the time, but you might have some preferences or things that you're used to using. The other thing that's here that you're likely to use is our themes, and this allows you to do things like change any color or anything like that. The most useful ones in the 3D viewport you can change, I'll talk about that in a second, but the other thing that you can do is change things like the thickness. For example, if we come here, we might want to have our outline width being thicker. You can see it getting slightly thicker there. The final thing that might be of interest is this interface option. Depending on the size of your computer screen, this resolution scale can be changed, and that will change the size of all of the iconography and all of the text. So if we put that larger, you can see if you've got any eyesight issues or a particularly tiny screen, you can change that and make that bigger or smaller as you choose, and 1 is the default. If you do want to change any of these settings, you'll notice that it's auto-saving your preferences, so you don't actually need to come here, you just close it and it's automatically saved. You can turn that off if you want to, so then you have to save your preferences here each time you change something, and you can load the factory preferences should you choose to. I think that's probably the most you're going to use from these. Rendering is to do with, well, when you're rendering images or animations, and I don't think I've used window once, but it's there if you want to take a look at it. Next up we've got this section here, and these are our automatically set up workspaces. You can see at the moment we're in layout, which is generally your design, but we have other options as well, and what this will do is it's got some presets for these windows, we'll talk about those in a second, and how they're laid out and what's there. For example, if I come to modeling, we get rid of this one at the bottom, so we've got a bit more space. Sculpting, we add in our sculpt brushes along the bottom, and then things like your UV editing is going to look totally different with a different layout that Blender thinks is most useful for you. You have some other ones as well. You also have the option here, if you come to the plus, of creating your own workspace and starting at a different point. So you can create a setup of these windows that you like. Importantly, you can just do that with your startup file, but you might want to always have something available so you can flick between them. I wouldn't worry about this too much, I just want you to know that it's there. And then finally along the top you have your scene option. What this does is basically sets up multiple scenes if you need them. So we can add a new scene, you can either copy the original ones or just create something entirely new, and you can see this is different. I can move to view a different point, and at any point I can come back to my first scene in that new view position as well. Probably most useful for animating, but you might have other uses for this. I generally won't use it very much because I don't animate in Blender. I model for 3D design and printing. Now those options at the top will not change. They will remain there whatever you go into in Blender, so they'll always be there. What happens below is the things that's going to be more changeable. So at the moment we've got a setup of 4 windows that you can see here, each one outlined by a curved corner section. So our standard layout is to have our 3D viewport here, that's our main section. We have our object outliner, which has all of the different objects that we've got in our scene, and we can click between them. We can also do things like make them hidden or unhidden, and we can do the same thing for if you're rendering, though obviously that won't have any impact here. We can also put things into collections, so if I add a new collection, we could, let's just Shift and D and Shift and D to duplicate those. I could select these 2 cubes, put them into that collection, and we can just hide and unhide whole collections should we choose to. Below that we have our properties window. This has all of our active tools, anything like rendering or the world properties, but also our data for individual objects once we've clicked on them, and we can do things like add modifiers. Each of these is probably a video in itself, but you'll notice a lot of videos will refer to these for different things you're trying to do. And then finally at the bottom, you will have your timeline, and that's for use in animation. Now, all of these can be changed or got rid of as you choose and for whatever's useful for you. And that's the bit that I really want to focus on. All we need to do is take our mouse to any edge that goes between the windows, and you can drag them to make them bigger or smaller. You can also totally get rid of them. If you don't like this and you're not going to use this because you're not going to animate, you could right click and then we can join down, and it gives you a little idea of what's going to happen as we join down, because it's going to get rid of the area that's grayed out. So now we don't have that section, giving us more space on the 3D viewport. Or we might decide that we need more space over here, or we might have a lot of objects in our outliner that we need to see more of. Now all of these windows will automatically have a bar at the top, similar to this one. For example, if I change this into another 3D viewport, you can see we get exactly the same top bar as we would do here. We also, in the top left-hand corner of each one, as I've just used, have our options of what can be viewed here. So we can make multiples of the same thing, looking at different angles. We can always come back to our properties, or if we want to make a new window, we can just come to any corner of an existing window, and you'll see that our mouse changes as we go into that, drag up, and it's going to create another, in this instance, 3D viewport, and we can again change that if we want to bring back our timeline. And then we can drag that down or close that should we want. So anything you accidentally close, you can always get back to. There's never a concern about not being able to get back to something that you've already got set up. Now, one thing that I will mention, just as a little added tip, is that in this 3D viewport that we've got here, we can also turn this into 4 3D viewports, looking at each of the different axes and then once in perspective mode. To do that, as long as you've got your mouse in the window, all you need to do is hold Control, Alt and Q, and this will change this into quad view. And you can see here we've got a view from the Z-axis, the Y-axis and the X-axis. We've covered these views, and you can zoom in or pan around with these, but you can't use the middle mouse button to accidentally rotate out of these orthographic views, whereas your perspective view here will allow you to see whatever you want to look at. And you can just move between these very easily. And for example, if I wanted to modify this object, you can see this from every angle and how it's going to have an effect. So that's a really useful tip, and anytime you're done, you just press Control, Alt and Q again to come back out of it, and I'm going to come back into object mode. So hopefully that was an effective quick look at the layout of Blender, and a couple of tips of what you can use the different windows for and how you can manipulate them to make sure you get the layout that you want. In our next video, we're diving into object mode, where we can bring in and manipulate base objects to begin setting up the designs that we want to create. I hope to see you in that video, and have a great day.